Welcome to the Pediatric Playbook, where we guide growth in children and balance in ourselves. I'm Amanda, a pediatric occupational therapist, here to share stories, strategies, and insights to support parents, therapists, teachers, and caregivers as we navigate the ever-evolving world of child development together. From tackling potty training and sensory needs to celebrating milestones, this podcast is your go-to resource for practical advice, inspiring stories, and honest conversations. Each week, we'll explore topics that matter to you, whether you're a parent looking for answers or a pediatric OT, SLP, PT, or educator searching for fresh perspectives. I'll also sit down with other therapists and professionals to dive into their unique journeys and the lessons they've learned along the way. So grab your coffee, settle in, and let's dive into this journey together. Whether you're here for personal growth, professional insights, or a little bit of both, I am so glad you're here. Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the Pediatric Playbook. Today, I'm so excited because we have a very special guest and one of my very best friends and fellow OT, Shannon. We went through OT school together, and so we have really been through the highs, the lows, and everything in between over the last few years. Shannon has worked in outpatient peds, inpatient acute, home health peds, skilled nursing, pretty much every area of OT, and today she is here to share her story with us. We'll dive into her journey into becoming an OT, tips for navigating OT school, and so much more. All right, let's get into it. So Shannon, let's kind of start at the beginning. Can you tell us a little bit about maybe what inspired you to pursue OT? Like, was there a specific moment that made you think, okay, like this is what I want to do?
Yeah. So back when I was, I think about like 14 or 15, there was this place in my hometown in New Jersey that did like therapeutic riding and hippotherapy. And my older sister had volunteered there, and I always wanted to also volunteer there since she did. So I signed up, and that's kind of when I was introduced to therapy. I really had, obviously, prior to that, no idea what OT was or anything. And I just kind of like fell in love with working with adults and kids with disabilities. I even like wrote my college essay about how one of the riders kind of changed the way I viewed communication and how they kind of inspired me to like have a deeper understanding of people who maybe weren't verbal. So it was like a huge like impact on why I wanted to be OT. And then I was pretty sure that's what I wanted to do, but I was, I guess, a wise 18-year-old and I didn't want to commit fully. I did apply to a 5-year program, but I decided not to go because I wanted to have the option to change my mind if I wanted to. So I ended up going to like get a 4-year undergrad at the University of Delaware and then moved on to get the master's degree afterwards.
Amazing. Yeah, I feel like a lot of people have a similar story. I know coming out of high school, I also knew I kind of wanted to be in healthcare. I definitely wanted to help people, but I didn't want to hone in on one thing, and I really wanted to have fun in college. So I wasn't quite ready to commit to that. So I totally get that as well. And we both know that going through OT school, then once we got there, can definitely be tough despite all of the fun that we had. And it was definitely a challenge in some ways other than just getting through our neuro labs from time to time. But what do you think some of the highs and lows for you throughout, once we got to grad school, throughout those years were?
Honestly, I feel like for me, and I think this is kind of a unique experience, I feel like most people have the most trouble in grad school, but I had the most stress getting into grad school. So, like, I wanted to go straight in from undergrad. So, I was doing the GREs. I did a senior research thesis. I was looking at schools. I was interviewing, applying all my senior year, and I was like so overwhelmed. So, once I got in, I was kind of like a breath of relief. I was like, okay, now I can kind of relax a little bit. I made it this far. But I feel like the school part of it was just, it was new to navigate. I think our program was different too, because we had like that hybrid learning situation, which I don't think they really explained that to us when we like apply to the program. And that was a weird adjustment because I thought, every class would be in person. And that was always what I was used to. I like didn't really do a lot of online classes in undergrad. So when we had to do all those lectures online and then go in person for all the labs, it was like a huge adjustment to be like more self-sufficient. I was not as good. We had to be so good at time management. But I think living together, we like always held each other accountable to it. So you knew like if your roommate was doing it, you should probably be doing it too, or we would like set aside time together. So I feel like that helps to have like people to help you in it. But it was definitely, I would say the hardest part was like neuro and anatomy, those labs. But I will say, I still think about that and remember it 5 years later. And it really does help me to have that experience. So it's like worth it. I thought that grad school it was hard. Don't get me wrong. But because I was so much more interested in it, because I knew I was going to use this, I was so much more motivated than undergrad when I was taking these random classes for like just for degree requirements. Whereas in grad school, it was like, we're going to use this. So we need to know it anyway.
Yeah, for sure. And I feel like the hybrid stuff, predated COVID for us. And so, maybe people listening now are like, that's the norm for them applying to OT school and stuff. But for us, that was something so new. And the school kind of dumped that on us when we got there. We were like, oh, okay. Like, but I do think finding friends when we got to OT school was amazing. The fact that, we found a group of, 5 to 10 of us that we were always around and always spending extra time studying. And you had those groups to share notes with and to teach you, in different areas and classes where maybe we didn't excel. And then we were the people to help others in areas where we did excel. And so I do feel like having that community once you get to school was so important. But the class size is so small that it really, made it easy to find people to connect with.
I think we got very lucky. We didn't know each other. We just met in that Facebook group and ended up obviously clicking very well. And I don't think I could have done it without like everyone else around us. I feel like we all held each other accountable. And like you said, like we would do like if someone was stronger in one area, they could help you with another. And we practiced for practicals in our apartment literally all the time.
I know when I think back on school, I always like remember all of the fun times that we have because we did have so much fun living in St. Augustine and just like enjoying time being friends and doing all of that extra stuff. But, when I really sit down and think about it, I'm like, oh my gosh, we literally were studying or in the lab or, taking like all the time because we did have that hybrid learning. There was never a moment where we were never caught up with our work.
No, I just felt like we were always behind. But yeah, I think having a good support, which I feel like I don't know if I would have done as well in school had I not had like you guys to go through it with. That would have been really hard to do that alone. So for people doing like truly hybrid programs where they're like working part-time and doing it, that I have so much respect for because that is so difficult.
Yeah. And, OT school was such a whirlwind. I feel like honestly, it flew by because we only had on campus for 4 of those consecutive semesters. We had the little, 1 or 2 week breaks between each, but we went straight through. And then we had our 2 clinical semesters. And then we just had to jump into the real world so fast. And for us, that happened right before COVID. And it was just, I feel like for me, it was really hard navigating our first job. I feel like we had to be like toughened up real quick because we were hit hard with something that was new, even for our bosses and supervisors and mentors. And so it was just a lot. So like, just thinking back on that, like what is one piece of advice that you'd give to students who are either in OT school already or are thinking about applying for this career? We talk about trusting the process a lot here. So what is one piece of advice you'd give them?
I think if you're a student considering OT, it is a great career. There's high job security. It's super flexible. You have to be super people oriented. You're talking all day. You always have to be quote on. So if you're a people person and you like that, it's definitely a good fit. If the idea of sitting behind a desk for 8 hours a day sounds boring, your OT would probably be a good fit. I would say focus on your grades as the prereqs in undergrad because then it makes it a lot easier. I wish I focused more on those prereqs earlier in college to make the process like I would have a lot more confidence when I applied. And if you're in OT school, I mean, my thought was always like, I made it this far. Not everyone makes it to this point. I know I can finish this. Like you were accepted to the school because they thought you could do this. So you have to just kind of keep pushing. It pays off. Like I still use so much of what I learned in school. Which I can't say the same about college. So like, but everything that we learned really is carried over so much. I think about it on the daily. So just knowing that you're going to use it forever, that there's a lot of weight to it, but it also is so practical. It's not like dumb and nuanced and just these tedious little things you have to kind of get through. Just know that this is going to make you a good therapist. And that's hopefully everyone's goal if they're an OT.
Yeah. And like you said, I mean, the programs are so strict in who they allow in. I like think back, I cannot even believe I got accepted into OT
Mhm.
school on my first try because there's thousands of people that want to get into these programs and they only accept so many. So if you are one of those people and you're in a program right now, like know you're special and this is meant to be for you because not everyone gets in to these programs.
Yeah. And even in like the applying process, I applied to 4 different schools and I only got into one and it just happened to be the one that I really wanted to go to. And prior to that, I didn't get rejected from colleges. Like I applied to a lot of colleges and I got into them all. So I was not familiar with this like rejection piece. And after 4 years of working through college, I was like really disheartened. I will say I like wanted to quit, but I was waiting on one last like acceptance and I happened to get in. But if I didn't, my plan was to do something else and then apply like a year later or 6 months later or whatever. So I feel like that's always an option. It's always going to be there.
Yeah, definitely. I felt the same way. I really wanted to go to MUSC in Charleston, which is funny because full circle, I live here now and I absolutely love it. But I'm so grateful that I had gotten waitlisted at that school and almost didn't even go to St. Augustine where I got accepted
Mhm.
because I wanted this one so bad. But it was truly meant for me to go to St. Augustine and the friendships and, career path that it's taken me on now to this day. I don't know if I would necessarily have that same experience if I had went to MUSC. And so just again, trust the process if you are in it right now, or if you have gotten some denial letters or wait lists from certain schools, go with your gut. And, if you have gotten accepted into a school, like go with it because you never know what's going to happen next time around.
I'm so happy that was the only school I got into because I could not imagine. I'm like, it was a great school. We learned everything we needed to. We made great friends. We had so much fun. Like, I wouldn't have wanted to go anywhere else in
Exactly.
retrospect.
Yeah, I feel the same. Okay, well, let's kind of shift a little bit back into the career now that, we've been working for about 5 years. One of the really big parts of our job is working with these families and supporting them. And it's something you don't always realize, in OT school, right? They kind of talk through all of these random things and the clients you're going to see and what you're going to do with them and what interventions you're going to do. But how do you approach these family relationships and dynamics, especially when things get challenging or tough and there's things that are maybe getting sticky?
For families, I mean, it's different, a little bit different in peds versus like geriatric. But for pediatrics, I mean, just humanizing parents, I feel like was a big thing for me because you have to remember they're just doing the best they can with what they have available, whether that's like financial or knowledge or information or time, even. It could be like so easy to pass judgment on how a parent is parenting when we quote know what's best or what's right or what we suggest. But the reality is it's so hard for a lot of families to manage whatever it is they're managing. If it's a disability or an injury or an illness, whatever it is, there's a lot that goes into it. And so you can recommend things and hope that it gets carried over, but just be great, like have grace with that. Like we might know what to do, but and giving the advice, it's always easier to give advice than take it, obviously. And like coming from me, I don't have children of my own yet. So I always felt like I had to have that humility of being like, this is what I think is really best. But like, you are the parent at the end of the day. Like you are in charge. You gave birth to this child. You care for this child. You're there in and out. Like you can listen to me and I can hope to educate you, but just humanize them and realize that they're not going to be able to do literally everything you say. And no one's going to, take it exactly as it is. And I think, it gets complicated when you have like a modern family. A lot of times I wasn't working with just a mom and a dad, like this nuclear family situation. It's 2024. That's not the thing. And so you have caregivers and you have aunts and uncles, or you have foster parents or grandparents that are involved. And I think there's a lot of moving pieces. So the biggest thing I would do is just communicate. I would over communicate to the point of, I don't even care if it annoys you. Like, this is good information for everyone to have. And obviously, like, within what's allowed, like who the guardian is and who you're allowed to talk to and stuff like that. But even like caseworkers and just like having really open communication, I feel like I over communicate to the point where sometimes, like, even in my current job, I'll tell caseworkers things and they're like, okay. And I'm like, I just like, you should know that. And they're like, okay. But I'd rather overextend and over communicate than under communicate.
Yeah.
I don't know. Do you have any other advice?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like that's especially in pediatrics, you do have to understand these families, and a lot of them aren't just getting OT. They're getting speech therapy, they're getting physical therapy, they have their, family trainers coming in. They also have doctor's appointments for their kiddos depending on what's going on. And so, if they're I know we talk a lot about, for the companies I work for, when you're working in home and in early intervention, it's all 1099 and you get paid per visit. And so we try to hold these families to a standard of, okay, cancellation policy and all these other things. But when it comes down to it, at the end of the day, it's really hard. You have to sometimes, stay true to yourself and what you need and set boundaries. But at the same time, you have to be very understanding and very flexible in this career, in knowing that these people have so much going on and we are not the only thing that they have on their to-do list for the week. So that's
such a good point.
It's been huge for me. And like, being in early intervention for 3 years now, I finally started to, really understand those dynamics and understand to not give so many tips and home exercise things each week, maybe leaving them with just one thing to focus on that week because their brains are, going at 100 miles per hour. But I like how you talked about how there's so many people involved too. Everyone has, a nanny, their daycare providers, people coming in the door that are eager to learn and want to help too. So it's been really awesome seeing the carryover between all people and not just mom or not just dad.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I feel like making it digestible, because I have all this information and sometimes I want to just be like, oh my God, like we do blah, blah, blah. And that's so much. Like you said, they have recommendations coming from 10 different people. This is all most likely new to them. They probably have another child. Like, there's so many things to it. So I feel like for you, I mean, with having this social media, like you can put these like tips and pieces of information that are so helpful to parents in digestible formats and like quick little blurbs. And that's so helpful, which is, I feel like, why people appreciate that. But as a therapist, that's also good to keep in mind.
Yeah, I know. The social media stuff can get tricky sometimes because you try to make things quick and digestible and, appeasing to the eye when people are, people scroll so quickly if you don't catch them right there. But you can also have like the negative side of that too, right? Where they're not getting a full picture. And some people are like, well, what do you mean by this? You didn't explain it, or I don't understand. And so it's definitely very different, following OT and speech and healthcare accounts, they're just there to kind of give quick tidbits. But the important thing is for you to go find an individual therapist that can alter and give you direct guidance for your child and your specific needs, and actually explain in depth these things to you guys. Anyone that's on social media, maybe there's some people out there that are, making their full-time salary through it, and, I applaud them. But for most people out there, it's just kind of like a little side thing. It's fun. People want a way to give back while also making a little bit of extra stuff on the side to support us. We will pop into finances here in a second, but we definitely do not make as much as we would love to, I'm sure, in this career field. And that's all people in healthcare, I think. So, it's just, the social media stuff it's fun. It's more fun than anything.
It's a lot to navigate, I'm sure. I cannot imagine.
Yes, it can, but it's fun. And this is another thing that I really love to ask people, but looking back, what are just a couple things that you wish you knew before you actually became an OT or dove into OT school?
I feel like I have a few, and some are like positive, some are negative, but they're all good pieces of info. My big one is that insurance sucks. So they don't talk about it enough in grad school.
Oh my gosh.
there's so much more to insurance and navigating things, and there's just so much red tape. So I feel like it sometimes gets in the way of providing the care that you think is best for a patient, whether it's like pediatric, geriatric, whatever. I've seen this in every setting I've worked in, and it sucks. Like, because it's just, there's nothing you can do about it sometimes. So you just have to kind of make the best and get creative. And it's just not always going to be as ideal. You have to be really flexible. And the insurance is a big piece of that. They always tell you to be flexible as an OT, but that was like a big kind of, okay, this actually really does dictate kind of how everything works. But that's like one of the big ones. They always told us too, you can't pour from an empty cup. And I think that I heard that so many times, but I didn't really realize what that truly meant until later in my career. Like, don't be a martyr. Don't give everything from you just to help other people. We are in a helping career, but you are still a person too. And I think that's something that I still talk about with therapists I work with now. Like, we talk about that. Like, you have to take care of yourself because you're not going to be able to be a good therapist, a good friend, a good partner, whatever it is, if you're just so emotionally, mentally, physically drained. So just always like still put yourself first, even though this is like a helping career. I don't know. We've heard that, but in practice, it's so different. Another big one that I thought was that OT school is just really fun. And I don't know if that's a unique experience to us, but I had so much fun. So if I could go back and tell like freshman year of college me, like, listen, you'll make it and you're going to have so much fun. You're going to learn so much. It's going to be hard, but it's going to be so great. Like, I would have been so much less stressed for 4 years.
I like feel like I could cry just thinking back on those 2 years of OT school. I mean, I definitely think we had a unique experience, but it was so fun. And like, not just fun outside of like, we had so much fun in all of our labs.
Yeah.
Because we were just like goofing off for 2 straight years and like, you know, while also learning, but it was just, oh my gosh, we just had so much fun.
I did really like the labs that we did in school because they were really hands-on and interactive. And like, in retrospect, it seemed so silly and goofy to do some of that stuff at the time. Do you remember when I like fed you? You had to be blindfolded and they made us feed each other so we could see what it felt like. I think about that all the time with people who can't feed themselves now that I work with geriatrics. It's so weird. But at the time, it was like the funniest thing.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. It was, you were like, just like shoving, there were like fruit cups and like weird things that I also didn't like. But, you know, you think about taking people's, you know, independence away from them. And I think about it, even just not with clients that I work with, like in my day to day with like family and friends and grandparents that I'm around now. And I see them like their independence, you know, as our parents and our grandparents are starting to get older, you know, we're starting to watch them lose some of their independence as well. And, you know, you think about like, okay, you have to put yourself in their shoes also sometimes and be like, okay, obviously they're being stubborn because, you know, I can't even imagine myself being in my 80s and 90s and starting to some of that independence. So especially with that older adult population, it's just so important to consider.
Yeah. To be like, because you when you were a kid, you can imagine being a kid, but almost 30, I can't imagine being 90s. Like, it's hard for me to imagine. But anyway, another piece of advice is like, always remember it's a job. I kind of made OT my identity for a long time. Like, that was what I wanted to do from a like fairly young age. And I was like, this is me. Like, I'm going to be an OT. That's what I would tell people. That's like who I was. And I think I got into the career and like kind of hyped it up in my head about like what I thought it was going to be. Not that it's bad necessarily, but just that it's not as like fantastic. And I don't even know what word to use to describe it, but just I made that who I was. But I had to learn like in my first year or two, like this is a job at the end of the day. And it should be treated that way too. Like, it can't be who you are because you're going to get disappointed. You're going to get frustrated. You're going to get annoyed. You're going to have like burnt out days. And, you know, you can't make like being an OT and prioritize being a good therapist over who you are. Like, you have to maintain everything else outside of that.
For sure. I find myself, you know, really guilty of that too, especially being in the social media world. You know, I've kind of taken on that role as like potty training specialist and, you know, your pediatric OT. And I find myself like having a hard time, even when I'm like out in public and doing things that like I really enjoy. You know, I'm like thinking about OT and I wanted, you know, post something about OT or like, oh, you know, my house setup isn't this way, or I don't have kids of my own to like record that kind of thing with. And I find myself like even feeling guilty that I do not fully encompass what some people might think an OT is. And so it's definitely one of those things that I have to frequently remind myself of, like, okay, I am also Amanda, almost 30-year-old that like has all of these like friends and hobbies and interests in her life outside of her, day-to-day job.
It's easy to be like, in America, we usually ask people like one of the first things, what's your name? Where do you live? What do you do? And that's like an American culture thing, kind of like, well, what's your job? And I feel like that defines people a lot. And I always thought that was like, oh, well, OT, that's me. That's who I am. And, the idea of that not being like everything about me, like, this need to be your personality. You can be an OT and you can have your own things. But I genuinely have like learned that. And that was a weird slap in the face I wasn't expecting, like a couple years in.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And kind of like going into like that side, like other countries, and this is like our thing. I know, the financial side of OT and OT school and things is a big thing. I don't know necessarily what the funding is like in other countries, but in the United States, it's very expensive to get a higher education. And, I know the debt to pay ratio has been a huge challenge for me and just navigating those student loans. Like, how has that been for you? And what are some strategies or resources that have helped you over the last few years? And what are you thinking about moving forward to kind of help manage that?
That is always like the big topic and point of contention, I feel like, in therapy and healthcare in general. If you're not like a doctor or surgeon, you feel underpaid. And, it's not like you feel underpaid for the work you're doing necessarily. It's just like in comparison to like someone who works maybe like a more corporate job or work like a remote job, it just seems so different. And the pay is definitely not what I expected. I think 5 years in, I expected to be at a much different place than I am now. The great part is you will literally always have a job. I have been able to work in every setting because you can get a new job tomorrow. That is like the biggest perk to it. And having like my partner had like issues with finding a job. He's not in healthcare. And I've had friends go through that too. I'm like, okay, this is really like a huge blessing to have this constant. There's such a high need for it. You're always going to have the job. There's always a need for it. But in terms of like pay, I don't think, it varies by setting. So you kind of have to navigate what you want to do versus what kind of pay. So like for me, I felt like certain settings weren't like paying me as much as I wanted to. Like I worked at a outpatient pediatric clinic. Like I left acute care, wanted to get into peds more. I went to an outpatient clinic, which I absolutely don't regret. It was a wonderful place to work. I learned so much. But like outpatient doesn't pay as much as a different setting like home health does or other things. But, there's pros and cons to all of them. I will say like you just have to kind of pick and choose like what you want out of it. And PRN like definitely pays more. I've done stints of PRN work too. It kind of sucks not to have health insurance or pay for health insurance. But, the pay is definitely better, but it's not as guaranteed. You're not always going to have hours necessarily. So there's like pros and cons to everything. And so balancing finances for me, like at this point in my life, I'm in a position where I am technically hourly, but I'm full time. So like I get paid hourly, but I usually have 7 to 8 hours of work a day. I think, we went to a private graduate school. I know there's public ones and probably picked a pretty pricey one in retrospect. And I definitely was not careful with money in grad school. Like I was like loaning out left and right, going on trips. Like I was like, I'll make so much, I'll just pay it right back. And so I wish I could give younger me the advice to just be more frugal. And it, a lot of people have debt. If you're in healthcare, if you have any type of secondary degree, you're going to have debt. And managing it has been hard. I'm really not good with finances and I don't give great advice, honestly. Like what's been helpful for me is like using an app to track things. I use Albert. It like automatically puts money away into a savings account. It reminds you if you have subscriptions you need to cancel, which I am like so guilty of wasting money that way.
I need that.
Yeah, it's pretty great. And it's pretty much free. And that's been helpful. But there's just so many different areas. You can do travel. And I know therapists that do travel kind of locally, that kind of play the system a little bit, works really good for them. Some people love PRN, and, it really just depends. And I think that's kind of the great thing about OT, is that it's so flexible. You can try everything. A lot of companies, like if you're full time and you're like, I actually want to go down to PRN, they're like, all right, I don't care. We'll just get someone else, like, and you can do PRN. So it's like super flexible, depending on the setting, obviously. But I think, I will say the pay does not feel like it's worth what you pay in grad school, depending on how frugal you are in grad school. And, going in straight from college to grad school, I didn't have any time to save money. I didn't make any money. I was working at like a gym. I was babysitting and nannying between the summer between college and grad school. So I think it's different depending on what stage you are in life. And I think because I went into it, and so did you, like so young, we were so young, like running through this whole process as like basically as quickly as possible. If I was doing it now, I would probably do it differently in terms of financials to lower my debt. But, you just pay it, and maybe one day they'll just forgive it. It'll
I
go
know.
away. I don't know.
I think
That's
about
what
that all
I'm
the time too. But I also think about, we did go right from school when all of our other friends graduated from college and went on to start their careers and started making, a real adult salary
Yeah.
in that first summer after college, where we, had 2 more years of school without working a job. And then on top of that, we had to take time to study for our boards and pass and apply to jobs. We had 2.5 years,
Yeah.
we're behind our peers from undergrad. And so I have to remind myself of that a lot too. I'll get kind of down on myself. Like I'm not, further along in my career, or I haven't had, enough time to pay off my loans. I haven't been making enough money for all this. But, at the end of the day, it's all part of this profession, and we can't blame ourselves that we didn't have a savings account, going into grad school to pay for this. And so, I'm also not the best at managing my money, but we're getting through it. And anything that's, helping us move towards a better career in the future for ourselves, it's going to be good for us.
Yeah, no, it is. And I think I'm hard on myself about like where I'm at financially. I'm like turning 30 and having a crisis internally about everything in my life. And I was like reflecting on every portion of my life. Like, where am I at? And I'm like, financially, I'm just not where I want to be. But I have friends that same thing. I always felt behind with my friends that were working. They'd be like, let's go to dinner. Let's do this. I'm like, I have no money. I don't even have a job yet. I don't have a real job. And so we are behind in that regard. Like we are 2 years behind everybody else. And also COVID just like, again, ruined everything. So that didn't help, especially for you, because you didn't get to work for that whole time. I was lucky and unlucky being in the hospital at the time, but
yeah. And I did work for a hospital system and thought that they would need me. And, they kind of sent me home and they furloughed me. But then something weird happened where I actually didn't qualify for the unemployment. And then, I just found last year, like a weird old like piece of mail or email or something where they did approve it, but I needed to send stuff in, but I never saw it. So yeah,
I forgot about that.
Just went a few months unpaid, but I went back and lived at home. And it's just kind of navigating when things in life come up and trying not to like go into full on panic mode, and knowing, especially in this career, like there's always going to be something better, and, just getting yourself to that next step and being confident and going, like you said, not just choosing an area that has the most money, but choosing an area that you're really passionate about, because, the more passionate you're going to be, the more, you're going to succeed in that area, and companies are going to want to hire you and pay you more. And it's just going to help get the ball rolling for you. And
And I know a lot of people in the job I'm in now, the hours are like wonderfully flexible. It's great.
Yeah.
I can go in kind of whenever I want and just see my list of patients and leave whenever I want. And so with that, some people go in really early, get off early, and honestly have a second PRN job on the side, which I've toyed with the idea a lot, but I reflect back on the whole, like, don't pour from an empty cup. And I feel like if I worked 10-hour days every day, the cup would be so empty. I don't know if I can do it.
You don't need to commit any more time, Shannon. You are doing all the things.
We're just doing our best. It's fine.
Oh, well, Shannon, thank you for all of your advice today. If there is just one last takeaway for our listeners today, whether they're students, new grads, or even really experienced OTs that are listening, what would it be?
I have two, maybe not just one.
Okay.
OT is a great career, and it is so rewarding. And I've had such rewarding experiences working in it. and it's not every day. You're not going to get that gratification from every patient every day. You're not going to get every thank you. And, but know that you're making a huge difference and it'll come back. The longer you're in the career, you'll realize that. I had a patient who I worked with about 6 months ago in my current job, and he discharged. He had a stroke. He was really active, super fit. And he had told me, I'm going to come back in 6 months so you can see how much progress I made. And honestly, I kind of forgot about it just because, I see so many patients a day and it's a short-term acute rehab. So there's a lot of turnover. But the other day he walked into our office and brought donuts and he said, I want to show you how much I've accomplished. And I want to tell you that you really saved my life and you inspired me to like do all this. And I was like crying, and it was, all those like annoying bad days that I've had, they were just completely wiped away. I was like, I'm never mad. Actually, I'm so like just knowing that. And I kind of did the math in my head, for the past, I've been in OT 5 years. How long of a day do I work? How many patients on average do I see? So I did this loose math calculation of how many people's lives I've probably had an impact on. And it's upwards of like 10,000. And just to think about that, not everyone has the means or the heart to thank you and realize that, but just know that you are making such a difference every day. And that is so worth it. But don't sell yourself short in a job and let yourself get underpaid at the same time. So it's rewarding, but you should be fairly compensated and you should have a good work environment. So, with that, I was a little scared to leave my first job, but don't be afraid to quit if it's a bad environment and you gave it your all. There's nothing wrong with it. And like I said, you always have a job and there's more lives to help. So don't be afraid to stand up for yourself in the career aspect and job portion too.
Shannon, I love that. And I love that story that just like gave me the chills. It's so true. There is just so much impact that you make, even when you don't think you've had the day. It could be weeks or months down the road and you didn't think you even impacted a family, and you get a text message or a video or a phone call, and this family is like, I am so sorry, we were going through it back then, but you were that person that got us through it. And so that's so important to remember. Thank you literally so much for sharing all of this and for being,
of course,
and sharing all of your insights into OT. I'm sure everyone is going to find this so, so helpful. I know our listeners are going to get a ton of value from listening to this episode. And for those of you listening, if you did enjoy today's episode, make sure you subscribe and leave a review. Thank you again for tuning in to the Pediatric Playbook. See you next time.
I hope you enjoyed this week's conversation and found it helpful as you navigate along this journey, whether that's supporting kids, growing as a therapist, or both. If you're looking for more resources, tips, or support, be sure to check out my website linked in the show notes and connect with me on social media at Your Pediatric OT on Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, or wherever else you can find me. You'll find everything from free guides to in-depth courses designed to help you make an even bigger impact. Thank you so much for tuning in to the Pediatric Playbook. And if you enjoyed today's episode, please don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with a friend or colleague who'd love it too. I can't wait to see you next time, same place, same time, right here on the Pediatric Playbook.